Chapter 1. The Impossible Human. The battlefield of Theta Prime was a maelstrom of fire and destruction. Plasma bolts streaked across the smoking ruins of the colony's outer defenses, detonating against steel barriers and melting through anything unfortunate enough to stand in their way. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal, the ground littered with the remains of shattered mechs and downed combat drones. For Commander Vierak, Supreme Warlord of the Zorthian Dominion, this battle should have been over in minutes. His force's armored elites, armed with the most advanced plasma weaponry in the galaxy, had stormed this human colony expecting little resistance. Humans were weaker, slower, less evolved. Their technology was primitive, their biology fragile. Yet here he stood, watching in disbelief as his warriors fell one by one, their weapons seemingly useless against their enemies. Virak's 4 crimson eyes narrowed as he focused on a single human warrior, a tall, broad-shouldered soldier who was charging straight through enemy fire, dodging plasma bolts with unnatural ease. One of Virak's best marksmen, a Zorthian elite named Korak, leveled his rifle at the human's center mass. The weapon whined, its energy cells building to a critical charge before firing a shot powerful enough to burn through reinforced starship hulls. The bolt struck the human dead center. It should have reduced him to vapor. Instead, the plasma dispersed on impact, flickering into harmless static before fading into the air. The human didn't even slow down. Virak's mandibles twitched in disbelief. What just happened? He growled. The Zorthian gunner, Korak, checked his rifle, his scaly hands trembling. Commander, our weapons aren't working on them. The battlefield seemed to stop. And then, in a voice filled with fury and confusion, Virak shouted in shock. Enemy weapons don't work on humans? The turning point. Across the battlefield, more and more Zorthian warriors were realizing the same terrifying truth. Their rifles, their cannons, their energy blades, none of it was harming the humans. Every time a plasma bolt hit, it dissipated harmlessly, as if their weapons were firing mere light instead of lethal energy. The humans, on the other hand, they weren't hesitating. They fired ballistic rounds, threw grenades, and engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat, cutting down the Zorthian ranks with a ruthless efficiency that sent panic rippling through the invading army. Virak's mind raced. How was this possible? The Zorthian Dominion had conquered over 100 worlds, wiping out species far stronger than humans. Their weapons were unmatched, their warriors unstoppable. And yet here, on Theta Prime, their might was meaningless. Virak gritted his fangs, scanning the battlefield for answers. Then his gaze locked onto a human scientist, a woman in a combat suit, hunched over a terminal in a bunker, rapidly typing commands into a holographic interface. It's them, Virak hissed, realization hitting him like a punch to the chest. The humans had done something, altered the battlefield in some way to neutralize their weapons. They weren't immune to energy weapons by nature. They had found a way to make themselves immune, and that made them far more dangerous than Virak had ever imagined. The scientist's secret. Dr. Elena Carter barely looked up from her console as the battle raged outside her bunker. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she frantically worked to keep the frequency field active. Her invention, the Adaptive Disruption Wave, ADW, wasn't perfect. It couldn't protect against kinetic attacks like bullets or blades, but against Zorthian plasma weaponry, it had made every human on this battlefield virtually invincible. Status? A soldier barked over her comms. Holding at 98% efficiency, Elena reported, fingers flying over the controls. The field is adapting to their energy signatures faster than expected. The soldier on the line let out a relieved laugh. You're telling me those lizard bastards just realized they can't kill us? I'd say it just dawned on them, yes? A deep voice interrupted. Good. Then it's time to end this. Elena turned sharply, her heart skipping a beat. Standing beside her was Major Darius Holt, leader of the Theta Prime Resistance Forces. His armor was scarred and battle-worn, his left arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage, but his eyes burned with cold, determined fire. Major, you shouldn't be here. You're injured. Injured isn't dead, Doc. He loaded a fresh magazine into his rifle. And I'm not missing the moment where we send these bastards running. Outside, the battle had begun to shift in the humans' favor. The Zorthians were panicking, their formations breaking down as they realized their greatest advantage, their weaponry, was now useless. It was time to end this fight once and for all. Virak's last stand. Virak's roar of frustration echoed across the battlefield. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. His remaining officers were frantically adjusting their weapons, recalibrating their plasma frequencies, but nothing was working. The humans had adapted, and the Zorthians had no counter. Then a voice rang through his comms. "Commander Virak, our forces are being slaughtered. We must retreat." Virak snarled. He had never fled from battle before. His pride, his honor, demanded that he stay and fight. But honor meant nothing if his entire army was wiped out. He clenched his fists. "All forces, fall back. We leave this world." Across the battlefield, the remaining Zorthian warriors activated their emergency recall beacons, their armor glowing with teleportation energy. Within moments, the once mighty invaders were gone, leaving only the wreckage of their failure behind. And for the first time in history, the Zorthian Dominion had been defeated. By humans. By an enemy they had believed to be weak. But Virak now knew the truth. The humans weren't weak. They were terrifying. Because unlike any other species before them, they didn't just fight back. They evolved. And that made them the most dangerous enemy the galaxy had ever seen. Chapter 2. The Dominion Strikes Back. The war chambers of the Zorthian High Command were eerily silent. It was a silence of disbelief, of shame, of simmering rage. Commander Virak stood in the center of the vast chamber, surrounded by the galaxy's most powerful warlords, each seated in their towering obsidian thrones. Above them, a holographic projection replayed the Battle of Theta Prime the moment human soldiers advanced through plasma fire completely unharmed. The Zorthians had lost, and no one in this room could accept it. Finally, a deep, rumbling voice broke the silence. "Explain this failure, Virak." The voice belonged to Grand Warlord Zervas, the supreme leader of the Zorthian Dominion. His 4 crimson eyes burned with fury, his mandibles twitching in barely restrained rage. Virak took a deep breath before speaking. "The humans have developed a countermeasure against our weapons, Great Warlord. A technology that renders all energy-based attacks ineffective." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the chamber. "Impossible," hissed Warlord Krelkar, one of the most feared tacticians in the Dominion. "No species in the known galaxy has ever resisted our plasma weaponry. None. And yet, they have," Virak growled. "I have seen it with my own eyes. I struck one with a plasma blade myself. He did not even feel it. Our warriors were forced to engage in melee combat, where humans proved more resilient than anticipated." Grand Warlord Zervas's mandibles tightened. "Then the humans have done what no other species has dash," he said slowly. "They have forced us to adapt." A heavy pause. Then, Zervas leaned forward, his voice dripping with dangerous intent. "We will not allow this humiliation to stand." He turned his 4 burning eyes toward Virak. "You are to return to Theta Prime with a new strategy. Wipe them from existence. If energy weapons are useless, we shall remind them of something older." Virak frowned. "What do you propose, Great Warlord?" Zervas smiled. It was a terrifying expression, one that promised violence in its purest form. "The humans wish to render our technology useless? Fine. Then we shall fight them without technology at all." The room grew colder. Virak's 4 crimson eyes widened as he realized what Zervas meant. The Zorthian Z species that had relied on plasma weapons and starship superiority for centuries were about to abandon their technological crutches and return to the ways of primal warfare. Back on Theta Prime, Dr. Elena Carter sat hunched over her terminal, exhausted but victorious. The adaptive disruption wave had been a complete success. It had turned the tide of battle, forcing the Zorthian Dominion to retreat for the first time in history. But she knew it wouldn't last. Humans had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Major Darius Holt entered the bunker, his combat armor still smeared with dust and sweat. "Document, tell me you have good news." Elena sighed, rubbing her temples. "The good news? The field is still active. We've recalibrated it to block future attempts at weapon adaptation." Holt nodded. "And the bad news?" Elena's fingers hovered over the holographic screen. "The bad news is that they'll find another way to kill us." "You think they'll try biological warfare?" Holt asked. Elena shook her head. No. The Zorthians take pride in combat. They won't rely on cowards' tactics. She turned toward the Major, her expression dark. They'll bring the fight to us. Personally. And as if to confirm her fears, the comms blared to life. Major Holt, we've detected a new fleet inbound. Holt's jaw tightened. Already? Damn it. He turned to Elena. How many ships? The soldier on the other end hesitated. None, sir. Elena and Holt exchanged a confused glance. What? Holt asked. Then what the hell are we detecting? The voice on the comm sounded shaken. Not ships. Drop pods. Hundreds of them. Holt's stomach dropped. Elena's eyes widened. They're coming to fight us hand to hand. And in the skies above Theta Prime, the storm had begun. The Zorthians unleashed. The first impact came like a meteor crashing into the colony's outer defenses. Then another. And another. Hundreds of massive wardrop pods rained from the heavens, slamming into the ground with the force of seismic bombs. The impact craters glowed with heat, sending shockwaves of dust and debris across the battlefield. And then, one by one, the pods burst open. Virak stepped out first, his battle armor stripped away, leaving only the primitive, ritualistic armor of his ancestors crafted from the bones of long-extinct Zorthian war beasts. The warriors who followed him were just as fearsome. Gone were their energy rifles and plasma blades. In their place were jagged war spears, serrated axes, and heavy-bladed gauntlets designed to tear through flesh and bone. The Zorthians had abandoned their technology. They had returned to the ways of their ancestors, a species built for war, evolved for combat, trained to kill with nothing but brute strength and cold precision. Virak took in the battlefield, breathing in the raw scent of war. No technology, no tricks, no weapons to betray us. He raised his war axe. We fight them as warriors, and we remind the humans what it means to face the Dominion. A guttural battle cry erupted from his warriors, and the second war for Theta Prime had begun. Chapter 3. The Primal War begins. The ground trembled as the Zorthian warriors surged forward, their massive forms illuminated by the flames of battle. The air, once thick with energy fire, was now filled with the ringing clash of steel and bone, the cries of war, and the sickening sound of flesh being torn apart by savage weapons. The humans had forced the Zorthians to abandon technology. Now, the Zorthians would force the humans to fight like beasts. Commander Virak charged first, his war axe gleaming as he cleaved through a metal barricade like paper, sending human soldiers scrambling back. Major Darius Holt stood at the front of the human defense line, gripping his combat knife in one hand and a ballistic rifle in the other. The rifles were effective, but they weren't fast enough against warriors who could close the distance in seconds. Hold the line. Do not let them break through. Holt bellowed. The first wave of Zorthians smashed into human defenses, their war cries shaking the very air. And then the real slaughter began. A battle of flesh and blood. Elena Carter watched in horror from the command bunker as human soldiers engaged the Zorthians in melee combat. It was brutal, savage, unrelenting. The Zorthians were nearly 7 feet tall, their muscles dense with biological armor, their bone-forged weapons designed to rip through flesh with terrifying ease. Even with advanced exosuits, the human soldiers were outmatched in raw strength. A Zorthian brute grabbed a soldier, lifting him into the air before smashing him into the ground with bone-cracking force. Another swung his war spear, impaling 2 men at once, their bodies writhing in agony. Blood soaked the ground. The humans fought valiantly, but they were being overwhelmed. And then, Elena saw something unexpected. Some of the Zorthians hesitated. She zoomed in on her tactical display, her eyes widening. Not all of the humans were falling like expected. Some were surviving attacks they shouldn't be able to withstand. A Zorthian warrior slashed at a human soldier, his razor-edged gauntlet slicing across the man's exposed shoulder, but the wound barely bled. Another human took a direct punch to the chest that should have crushed his ribs, but he staggered back, still breathing, his bones unbroken. Elena's mind raced. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. Then, the truth hit her like a thunderbolt. "Holt, we need blood samples from the soldiers now." The hidden evolution of humanity. Back on the front lines, Holt barely had time to react to Elena's call. He was too busy stabbing a Zorthian warrior in the throat, dodging a massive axe swing as he fought for his life. "Kind of busy, Doc," he growled. "Listen to me," Elena shouted through the comms. "Something is happening to the soldiers. Some of them are surviving injuries they shouldn't. Some are taking hits that should kill them, but they're walking away." Holt dodged another Zorthian spear thrust, rolling behind cover. "What the hell are you saying?" "I'm saying, I think humans are evolving." Holt froze. Then, he watched in real time as a human soldier who had just been stabbed through the stomach rose to his feet, eyes burning with something primal. The soldier ripped the spear from his gut, ignoring the pain, and charged at his attacker with nothing but his fists. And when he hit, the Zorthian warrior staggered backward, his armor dented from the sheer force of impact. Holt's mind reeled. The humans weren't just resisting damage. They were adapting. The human advantage. Elena worked furiously, analyzing the biological readings of soldiers who had taken direct hits. What she found shook her to her core. "Holt, our soldiers' bodies are changing dash," she said breathlessly. "The stress of combat, the injuries, the Zorthian biological attacks our cells are responding. Faster than normal." "In English, Doc?" "We're evolving in real time." Holt stared at the battlefield, watching as more and more humans began to fight back harder than before. Their wounds were clotting instantly. Their muscles were adapting to the pressure. The more they fought, the stronger they became. The Zorthians realized it too, and for the first time in the history of their species, they knew fear. Virak's realization. Virak watched as his mighty warriors, the greatest fighters of the Dominion, began to fall. Not because the humans were stronger at the start, but because they were learning. A human who had barely been able to dodge his first attack was now matching him blow for blow. Another who had been struggling to land a hit minutes ago was now moving with terrifying precision, targeting weak points in his armor. Virak's mind screamed in denial. They shouldn't be able to do this. And then, he remembered something ancient. A long-forgotten legend about a species that once roamed the stars. A species that had no claws, no fangs, no natural armor, only the ability to adapt, to learn, to survive at any cost. A species that was rumored to have been so terrifying, even the Dominion refused to record their existence in history. And now, as Virak stared into the unrelenting, unyielding eyes of the human warriors before him, he understood. Humans were not just another race to conquer. They were the monsters from the forgotten past, and they were about to reclaim their place as the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Chapter 4. The Last Mistake. The battlefield of Theta Prime was no longer a war zone. It was a massacre. The Zorthians had come to this planet expecting a conquest. They had imagined themselves unstoppable, their warriors undefeated. They had abandoned their technology, believing that sheer physical might would win them the day. Instead, they had unleashed something far worse. They had forced humanity to evolve. And now, they were watching their worst nightmare unfold before them. The evolution of war. Commander Virak staggered backward, his war axe slick with human blood, but his heart pounding with growing terror. Across the battlefield, his warriors, the greatest warriors in the Dominion, were falling one by one. Not because they were weaker, not because they lacked skill, but because the humans were learning too fast. He watched as a human soldier he had personally cut down minutes ago stood back up, his wounds already sealing. His movements, once sluggish and desperate, were now precise, calculated, as if he had memorized every attack Virak had made. A Zorthian warlord smashed his gauntlet into a human's ribs, only for the human to grin through the pain, twist the warrior's wrist, and break it in a single brutal motion. Another soldier, who had been struggling against a 2-on-1 attack, suddenly moved with unnatural speed, dodging both assailants before shattering their skulls against the dirt. Virak felt something deep within his bones. Something no Zorthian had felt in centuries. Fear. "Fall back," he roared, his voice shaking with disbelief. "All forces, fall back." The horror of humanity. Dr. Elena Carter and Major Darius Holt watched from the command bunker as the Zorthians broke formation, something that had never been recorded in any battle in history. Holt exhaled, gripping his rifle tightly. "They're running." Elena nodded, still staring at the bio readings. "They finally realized what we are." Holt turned to her. "Which is?" Elena swallowed. "We're not prey. We're predators." Virak's last stand. The remaining Zorthians sprinted for their drop pods, desperate to escape the battlefield, to retreat from the monsters they had awakened. But Virak refused to flee. His honor wouldn't allow it. "I will not run from this," he snarled, gripping his axe and turning to face the advancing human forces. "I am a warrior of the Dominion. I dash." He never finished. A human soldier tackled him to the ground, pinning him with inhuman strength. Virak roared in rage, swinging his axe, but the human caught it with one hand, stopping it mid-swing. That was the final moment Virak understood. Humans weren't stronger than Zorthians by nature. They weren't born superior. They were something far worse. They were an ever-adapting species. The longer the fight lasted, the stronger they became. The more damage they took, the more their bodies evolved to resist it. It wasn't just survival. It was domination. Virak stared into the unforgiving eyes of the human who had bested him, and for the first time in his life, he knew what it was to lose. The humans didn't need to conquer the Dominion, because if they kept evolving at this rate, they would outlast them. The end of an empire. The Zorthians fled Theta Prime. Their once mighty warships burned as they escaped the system, their leaders too ashamed to admit what had truly happened. Rumors spread. Whispers of the species that couldn't die. The warriors who absorbed pain, who learned from every attack, who turned every war into a proving ground for their next evolution. The Dominion did not launch another invasion against humanity. They never would again, because they had made a terrible mistake. They had given humans a reason to fight, and in doing so, they had created the most unstoppable force the galaxy had ever seen. Epilogue. The last words of Virak. In the dark halls of the Dominion's War Council, Virak stood before the Grand Warlord Zervas, silent and broken. The mighty warrior who had once spoken with arrogance now stood humbled. Zervas scowled. "You are silent, Virak. Have you no words? No excuses for your failure?" Virak lifted his gaze, and when he spoke, his voice trembled. "We should never fight the humans again." Zervas's mandibles twitched in rage. "Cowardice." Virak shook his head. "No. Wisdom." "Why?" Zervas growled. Virak's eyes darkened. "Because we have made them stronger." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a war council that would never understand, until it was too late.